ever get that feeling? Like when you know you need to speak English and your brain just kind of freezes up. It's like suddenly everything you've learned just disappears.
Yep.
And it's so weird because like you can understand everything perfectly fine. You know, you can read, you can listen. But when it comes to actually speaking, it's like this huge mental block pops up.
Frustrating.
Right.
It really is. Yeah.
And, you know, it doesn't matter if you're giving a big presentation or just chatting with someone at a coffee shop.
Right. It can hit you anywhere.
It's like this universal experience for anyone learning a language, no matter how far along you are.
It really seems to be, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating, really, just how deeply rooted that fear can get.
It is.
And I think what makes it even more complex is that it's not just about the language itself. You know, it ties into our confidence, how we think other people are judging us, all sorts of things.
Exactly, and that's precisely what we're diving into today. We're calling this our deep dive into the fear of speaking English. So the mission here is to get to the bottom of why this fear exists for so many people, and more importantly, to try to figure out how to overcome it.
Exactly.
And we're not just going to speculate or anything, you know?
Right.
We actually have some amazing insights to share with you. So you found this episode of a podcast called Podcast and Chill, and they had this really interesting discussion, right?
I did. It was a great episode.
Yeah.
And they had two guests on, Lena and James, who were both sharing their personal experiences with this fear of speaking English.
Perfect. And it sounds like they had a lot of really great first-hand perspectives, right?
They did. It was really insightful.
So let's jump right into it. Based on their conversation, what did Lena and James identify as the core reasons behind this fear? Like, what are the main culprits here?
Well, one of the big ones right off the bat was the fear of making mistakes.
Yep.
And I think Lena really captured it well when she talked about how that fear can be so paralyzing because people worry about sounding unintelligent.
Right. And James mentioned that too, but he specifically focused on the fear of mispronouncing words, right?
He did. You know, he actually shared this story. It's kind of funny now, but I bet at the time it was pretty embarrassing.
Oh, I can only imagine.
He mispronounced the word focus in a meeting.
Oh.
He said, "Fuck us."
Oh, no. In front of everyone.
Yeah. And he was like totally mortified, you know.
Well,
But then he kind of laughed it off and said that it's one of those words that can trip anyone up.
Oh, absolutely. Focus is definitely one of those words that can catch you off guard. And it's not just about those big, obvious errors either, is it?
No, not at all.
It's also about those little grammatical slips.
Oh, for sure.
Or that feeling of not having the exact right word at your fingertips.
Yeah. Like you know what you want to say, but you just can't quite find the perfect way to express it.
Exactly. And then Lena mentioned another really important point. She talked about the fear of being judged by others because of your English skills.
Right.
And, you know, that makes total sense because it's like people might underestimate your intelligence or your abilities if your English isn't perfect.
Yeah. You feel like you're being evaluated based on how well you can speak, which can be really intimidating.
Yeah, I guess it makes you feel vulnerable in a way.
It does.
And, you know, it's interesting because in that Podcast and Chill episode, they also made a really good point about how speaking any other language, even if it's not perfect,
Right.
is still a huge accomplishment in itself.
It really is. It shows a willingness to learn and connect with other cultures.
Exactly. So maybe instead of focusing so much on being flawless, we should be celebrating the fact that we can even communicate in another language at all, you know?
Definitely.
Yeah,
Multilingualism is a strength, not a weakness.
totally.
It shows you're adaptable and open to new experiences.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the root causes of this fear, like making mistakes, worrying about pronunciation, and feeling judged. But now I'm curious to hear about how Lena and James actually dealt with these challenges in their own lives. Did they share any turning points or strategies that helped them move forward?
They did. Lena had a really interesting story. She was saying how she grew up in a place where English wasn't the main language. So you can imagine when she moved to the city for university,
Oh, wow.
it
Yeah.
was a pretty big shock, you know.
Oh, definitely.
And she talked about how the pressure to speak fluently in that environment just gave her so much anxiety.
That makes sense, being thrown into a situation like that.
And for her, the turning point came from, believe it or not, a moment of embarrassment.
Oh no, what happened?
Well, she was speaking in class, and she mispronounced the word beach.
Oh no, that's one of those words that can get you, though.
Yeah, it totally
It's
is.
easy to slip up on those vowels.
Exactly. And she was saying how in that moment, she just felt so self-conscious and like she wanted to disappear.
Oh, I can relate to that feeling.
But the amazing thing is that her professor didn't make a big deal out of it at all. Instead, he just gave her this really encouraging response. He said, "You're learning. Keep going."
Wow, that's so simple, but so powerful.
It really is. And for Lena, she said that that one interaction completely changed her mindset. It was like suddenly she didn't see mistakes as failures anymore,
Right.
but as a normal, even necessary part of learning.
That's such a good lesson. Sometimes it just takes one person's positive reaction to help you reframe those negative thoughts.
Exactly. It shows how much impact external feedback can have on our confidence.
Okay, so Lena had this kind of light bulb moment thanks to her professor. What about James? How did he approach his fear, especially since he was working in an international company?
Well, James was saying how he used to avoid speaking up in meetings because he's so afraid of messing up.
Yeah, I can see how that would be tough in a professional
It
setting.
was a big challenge for him, but he decided to tackle it head on. And his strategy was all about gradually building up his confidence.
Oh, I like that, taking small steps.
Yeah. So he started by making a simple commitment to himself. He would force himself to ask at least one question in every single meeting.
Okay, that sounds manageable, not too overwhelming.
Right. And it's interesting. He said at first he would overthink his questions.
Oh, I bet.
Like trying to make them perfect,
Yeah.
But over time, he started to realize that even if his English wasn't perfect, his contributions were still valuable, and people actually appreciated him speaking up.
That's great. So by consistently pushing himself, even just a little bit, he was able to become more comfortable over time.
Exactly. Both their stories really highlight that mistakes aren't the end of the world. They're actually opportunities to learn and grow.
It's like they say, you learn more from your mistakes than your successes.
For sure.
Now, I remember that in the Podcast and Chill episode, they also talked about some common myths surrounding English learning. Can you tell us a bit more about those?
Oh, absolutely. The first myth they tackled was this idea that you need to be practically perfect in English before you even start speaking.
Yeah, like you have to reach some magical level of fluency before you're allowed to open your mouth.
Exactly. And Lena's response to this myth was awesome. She basically just said, false. If you wait for perfection, you'll never start.
Oh, I love that. It's so true, though. It's like waiting for the perfect moment to do anything. It just never comes.
Right. Sometimes you just have to dive in.
Exactly. And then James addressed another common fear, the fear of being judged.
Oh, yeah, that one's a big one.
And he was like, also false. Most people are actually impressed when you speak another language.
And I think he's right,
Yeah.
While it's natural to worry about being laughed at or something, in reality, most people are actually pretty understanding and supportive.
I guess it goes back to that idea of celebrating the fact that you're even trying, right?
Absolutely. But it does make you wonder, why is there such a disconnect between our fears and the likely reality?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. Maybe it has something to do with our own insecurities. Like we project those fears onto others, even though they might not actually feel that way.
Yeah, could be. Or maybe it's because we tend to remember negative experiences more vividly than positive ones.
That's true. Negative experiences definitely stick with you.
Now, the third myth they debunked was this belief that only children can learn English easily.
Right. That's like impossible for adults to become fluent.
Yeah. And the host actually jumped in on this one, saying that while kids might learn differently than adults, adults are totally capable of becoming fluent too. It just takes consistent effort and practice.
Okay, so it's not about age, it's about dedication.
Exactly. And that's super encouraging for all the adults out there learning English.
It is. It really is.
It takes the pressure off of this idea that you need some kind of special talent or ability.
Yeah, totally.
It's more about putting the work.
So we've covered the reasons behind this fear, heard Lena and James's inspiring stories, and busted some common myths. What about some practical advice for our listeners? Did Lena and James have any actionable tips on how to actually overcome this fear?
Oh, they had some great ones. Lena's top tip was super straightforward.
Yeah.
Speak as much as possible.
Yeah, just get out there and do it, right?
Exactly.
Even if you make mistakes.
Even if you make a ton of mistakes.
Because it's all about getting comfortable with actually using the language, right?
Yeah, the more you speak, the less scary it becomes.
And that makes total sense. And I think it ties in perfectly with James's advice about gradually building up your confidence like he did with asking questions in meetings.
Yeah.
It's all about creating those opportunities for practice, even if they're small at first.
Right. And James had another tip that I thought was really clever. He suggested watching movies and mimicking the actors.
Oh, interesting.
He was saying how it's a fun and effective way to improve your pronunciation without the pressure of a live conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're not worried about making mistakes in front of anyone.
And you're training your ear to pick up on the nuances of the language.
Plus, you get to watch movies, which is always a bonus.
Exactly. It's like combining entertainment with learning.
Now, the third practical tip came from the host of Podcast and Chill, and it was all about finding a language partner.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic one, but it's so valuable.
It is, because having someone to practice with regularly creates this safe space where you can make mistakes and get feedback without feeling judged.
Right. And it makes learning more social and interactive, which is always a good thing.
It takes the pressure off of feeling like you're always being tested or evaluated.
Exactly. So instead of just studying grammar rules and vocabulary lists, you're actually using the language for its intended purpose, communication.
So to recap, we've talked about the common fears that hold people back from speaking English, making mistakes, being judged, and mispronouncing words. We've been inspired by Lena and James's stories of overcoming those fears through mindset shifts and consistent effort.
Right, and we've busted some myths along the way.
Exactly. And we've also armed ourselves with some practical strategies. Speak as much as possible, use movies to practice pronunciation, and find a language partner.
It all comes down to this idea of shifting your perspective on mistakes.
Yeah.
And committing to actually using the language, even if it feels scary at first.
And you know, it's funny because as we've been talking, I've been thinking about those final words of encouragement that Lena and James shared.
Oh, yeah. What were they again?
Well, Lena said, "Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every mistake is a step toward fluency."
That's so powerful. It really reframes mistakes as stepping stones, not stumbling blocks.
Exactly. And then James reminded us to have fun with it. Learning a language should be exciting, not scary.
And he's right. Learning a new language opens up so many doors and possibilities. It should be an adventure, not a chore.
Absolutely. So as you go about your day, I want you to think about this. If you can embrace those imperfections in your English-speaking journey and see those mistakes as opportunities to learn and grow, how might that mindset translate to other areas of your life?
Well, that's a great question.
Maybe it could help you be more confident in trying new things or taking risks, even if you're afraid of failing. It's definitely something to ponder.
It is. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive today. I hope the experiences of Lena and James have given you some valuable insights and encouragement on your own language learning journey.
Me too. And remember, you got this.
You do.